Of all of the images associated with Mercedes-Benz, probably none is more well-earned than that as the leader in safety engineering. For over 50 years, we have pioneered and developed some of the most important safety advances in the industry. Safety door locks, front and rear crumple zones, telescoping steering column, supplementary restraint system, and the automatic rollover bar are just some of the innovations that Mercedes-Benz has either invented or was first to introduce into their cars. Many of today's safety systems really began over 30 years ago here on the Mercedes-Benz accident testing grounds. At that point in time, our engineers came to the conclusion that the only way to improve accident safety was to subject vehicles and components already in production to realistic crash tests. And so we became the first manufacturer to carry out systematic crash tests. The data gathered from these tests and those that followed have provided the basis for the ongoing evolution of our safety engineering designs. Today, crash testing is commonplace throughout the industry as manufacturers look for ways to improve the safety systems of their cars. Crash tests are also conducted by the government as a means of evaluating the crashworthiness of various individual makes and models. As with everything else concerned with safety, Mercedes-Benz regards crash testing as an evolutionary process. In fact, here at the Mercedes Safety Center near Stuttgart, we've evolved a test which we believe offers a highly demanding yet realistic standard against which to evaluate the crashworthiness of any automobile. We'd like to show you that test and explain why we feel that it represents an important addition to those crash tests currently being conducted by the Department of Transportation. As you'll discover, our approach to safety testing is based on the conviction that any evaluation of crashworthiness must take into consideration data from at least two fundamental tests. One which examines the structural integrity of the automobile during a crash, and one which examines the effectiveness of the passenger restraint systems. The rationale here is that unless the automobile structure is designed to prevent engine compartment components from intruding into the passenger cell and ensure that the passenger survival space remains intact, the restraint systems are going to be of little use in protecting the occupants. Unfortunately, today's federal standards don't completely address the issue of structural integrity, only the performance of the restraint system. That's why we've developed an additional and highly demanding structural test. But before I get ahead of myself, let me provide some background. In the United States, there are currently two major federal crash tests relating to frontal impact crashworthiness. The first is called the FMVSS 208. Which stands for Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards number 208. And you'll often hear it referred to as simply 208. This is an automatic occupant crash protection test which all cars sold in the United States must pass. It involves crashing the full front of the automobile into a fixed flat barrier at 30 miles per hour. While this test is designed to evaluate the restraint system, each car must demonstrate that during the crash it meets certain measurement criteria like windshield and fuel system integrity and front occupant protection. If a car doesn't pass, it can't be sold. If it happens to be on the market, it must be recalled. Since every car must pass 208, you won't find anyone making claims about it in their advertising. But when it comes to the second test, well, that's a different story. In 1979, Congress told the DOT to devise a test program that would tell consumers about the crashworthiness of their automobiles. So, DOT came up with an experimental program called NCAP, the New Car Assessment Program. In order to provide a basis for consumer comparison, DOT decided to make the test tougher than FMVSS 208 by raising the speed to 35 miles per hour into a fixed flat barrier. For your information, the additional 5 miles per hour actually generates about 36% more crash energy. Now, while we often hear NCAP referred to as a frontal crashworthiness test, it is in fact still only an occupant restraint system test. The primary data generated by NCAP relates to the ability of the various restraint systems, seat belts, dash padding, airbags, and so forth, to protect passengers from injury in the event of a frontal collision. It's important to note here that NCAP does not evaluate the structural integrity of the automobile. And as we've already indicated, there's a very strong case to be made for testing the protective capabilities of the automotive structure, in addition to assessing the performance of the restraint system. In both NCAP and 208, the most talked about measurement is what the engineers call the HIC evaluation. This stands for Head Injury Criteria, and it's a measure of the acceleration registered in each dummy's head. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration states that if the HIC score is from 0 to 750, a head injury in this particular frontal impact would be unlikely. For HIC values from 750 to 1250, they suggest a head injury is possible, and that above 1250, a head injury would be very likely. In today's safety-conscious climate, where car companies are anxious to advertise even the slightest advantage, a HIC score under 750 is certainly going to be high on the list of subjects for new ad copy. There's nothing wrong with that. However, before anyone gets too excited about low HIC scores, there are two questions that must be answered. First, do low HIC numbers by themselves represent the best means of ranking and evaluating the ultimate protection provided by a particular automobile? And second, does the full front NCAP crash test represent the majority of real-world accidents? To answer those questions, we have to begin by defining what we mean by the majority of real-world accidents. Over 20 years ago, Mercedes-Benz began to send out teams of specially trained engineers to study accidents involving Mercedes automobiles in and around the Stuttgart area. In general, their intent was, and still is, to understand the nature and severity of different types of accidents, to analyze how the cars perform in actual accident situations, and to document the extent of protection provided by the designed-in safety features. At this point in time, more than 2,000 injury accidents have been studied. Nearly 70% of these involved some type of frontal impact. The majority of the others were side impact. Of great importance to Mercedes-Benz, these studies show and continue to confirm that only 25% of these front collisions involve a full frontal impact, which is what the fixed flat barrier test programs of 208 and NCAP represent. The other 75% involved impacts offset either to the right or left side of the automobile. Not only is this type of accident more frequent, it also puts greater demands on the car, and the operative words here are demands on the car. Let me explain. When a car traveling at 35 miles per hour strikes a barrier in a full frontal or 100% overlap collision, the crash energy is distributed over the entire width of the car. For purposes of discussion, we can say that 100% of the energy is absorbed by 100% of the car's width. However, when, as our studies show is most often the case, the crash is an offset collision, that is, the area of contact is on the front left or front right side, the energy is not evenly distributed over the full width of the car. And that part of the structure involved in the collision is required to absorb virtually all of the crash energy. To put it another way, in an offset crash like this one, approximately half of the automobile is asked to absorb 100% of the energy. It should be noted that in a Mercedes, due to structural ties, some of the energy is dissipated by the other side of the car. Because the offset crash places greater demands on the structure, you run a much higher risk that some of the components under the hood may be forced back into the passenger compartment. For this reason, Mercedes-Benz contends that while seat belts and airbags are still extremely important, the performance of the automobile structure and its ability to maintain the integrity of the passenger shell are at least as important as the performance of the restraint system. Let's look at the test films. For obvious reasons, we've disguised the identity of the competitive automobiles. In these offset collision tests, conducted at approximately 35 miles per hour, there is virtually no survival space for the front passengers. The cars in these examples experience an extreme rearward displacement of the steering wheel and instrument panel. There have been major intrusions by the firewall. The sidewall has been destroyed, and the front door is jammed. Had these been actual crashes, the best seat belts and airbags and padded interiors in the world would not have been of much benefit to the driver. It's clear that one of the primary keys to surviving this type of accident is to maintain the integrity of the passenger compartment. And in terms of testing the structural integrity, there is, in our opinion, no more demanding yet realistic test of an automobile's ability to protect the passengers than this offset crash test. This, of course, is at the heart of the rationale behind a basic principle of Mercedes-Benz safety design philosophy, and namely to design automobiles with the intent of giving them the ability to maintain the integrity of the passenger compartment, to protect occupants from engine compartment component intrusion. Having accomplished that, the next objective must be to design restraint systems that reduce the chances of the occupant being thrown against the windows, the steering wheel, the dash, or any other part of the interior. Now, what does all this mean when it comes to the crashworthiness of our automobiles in the offset crash test? Take a look. As you can see, the passenger compartment remains rigid and intact. There is minimum rearward displacement of the steering column and instrument panel. The side structure is maintained, and the doors can be opened. There's been only a minor intrusion into the footwell compartment. Having maintained the integrity of the passenger shell, the restraint system can perform as designed. The point to be made, however, and this relates directly to the end cap restraint test, is this. If the structure of the automobile is unable to protect the passengers in offset crashes, then the best end cap numbers in the world make little difference. For that reason, we believe that structural integrity must be pursued as a goal separate from restraint performance. And then the two must work in concert to provide maximum protection within the range of what's physically possible. In summary, we believe that in order to fully and properly evaluate an automobile's ability to protect its occupants in the event of a crash, the car must be subjected to both an offset structural integrity test and a 208 type restraint system test. Frankly, we think it's only a matter of time until the offset test is accepted as a key measurement of crashworthiness. In the meantime, it's our hope that as a result of having seen this video, you'll better be able to understand why we believe Mercedes-Benz remains the industry benchmark when it comes to overall safety engineering.